2 weeks after victory in Europe, British planners submitted a secret report. Its subject was not Japan, it was Russia. The study imagined British and American armies attacking their wartime ally, and it assigned the new war a starting date, 1st July, 1945. Less than 8 weeks separated peace in Europe from the date written on that page. This was Operation Unthinkable. Its existence does not prove that a Third World War was about to begin, but it does prove something almost as disturbing. Before the ruins of the Second War had stopped smoking, the victors were already calculating how the next one might be fought, and the calculation looked terrible. Germany had surrendered, but Europe had not returned to balance. The Red Army stood from the Baltic to the Balkans. It had broken the main strength of the Wehrmacht in the east, taken Berlin, and emerged as the dominant land force on the continent. American Lend-Lease had supplied vital trucks, food, locomotives, rail cars, fuel, and communications equipment. But Soviet soldiers had paid for victory in blood on a scale almost beyond comprehension. Now, millions of those soldiers were still under arms. British planners estimated Soviet superiority in Central Europe at roughly 3-1. Western air power was formidable, yet on the ground, the map was brutally simple. If cooperation ended, the Red Army already occupied the center of Europe. Churchill's immediate fear was Poland. The country Britain had entered the war to defend was falling under a Soviet-controlled political order. So he asked the Joint Planning Staff a question that sounded limited. Could force compel Moscow to accept a fair settlement? The answer became Operation Unthinkable. Its political objective was to impose the will of the United States and the British Empire on Russia, at minimum, to secure what the paper called a square deal for Poland. British, American, and Polish formations would strike east in Central Europe, hoping surprise and superior air power could force a decision. The planners even considered using rearmed German formations. Victory in Europe was barely 2 weeks old. Then the officers counted divisions. The exact totals changed with definitions, readiness, and geography. But the planners' own summary gave the Soviet forces in Central Europe an advantage of approximately 3-1. The conclusion did not depend on making every formation equivalent. Russia held an overwhelming advantage in land forces. The planners warned that a quick, limited success could not be guaranteed. If Moscow refused to negotiate, the Allies would face total war. To force a decisive result, they might eventually have to invade the Soviet Union itself, across distances that had destroyed armies before. The document Churchill requested as leverage became an argument against pulling the trigger. Here the history becomes more complicated than the legend. Historian Anthony Beevor presents a striking claim that Stalin had ordered plans for offensives into France and Italy, supported by communist seizures of power, and canceled them after learning of America's atomic bomb. It is a perfect thriller, but Beevor cites no Stavka archival file for it. His endnote points only to Sergei Beria's later memoir, in which Beria says General Sergei Stemenko told him about the plan. That is a chain of remembered testimony, not an operational order recovered from the archives. Stalin was imposing a brutal Soviet sphere in Eastern Europe. Western commanders had every reason to fear his capabilities. But capability is not the same as an approved plan to march on Paris. That distinction is the center of this story. Operation Unthinkable was also a plan, but not an order to attack. It was a contingency study, a way for leaders to discover what their options might cost before choosing one. Its proposed date, 1 July, makes the danger feel immediate. Yet the report shows why the planners judged the gamble so dangerous. It had to assume full British and American public support, that military release schemes would stop on 1 July, and that German manpower could be used. Those were planning assumptions, not established facts. Surprise might win local battles, but it could not erase the Soviet depth in men, armor, and territory. Japan was still fighting. Western armies were preparing to release troops, not turn east. Europe was dangerous because armies, suspicion, and unresolved borders overlapped. It was not balanced on one signed command waiting to be delivered. Then, on 16 July, a coded message reached Secretary of War Henry Stimson at Potsdam. Operated on this morning, it began. Results seem satisfactory and already exceed expectations. In the New Mexico desert, the Trinity device had exploded with a force of roughly 20,000 tons of TNT. Stimson immediately carried the message to President Harry Truman. A second cable used a stranger birth metaphor, reporting that little boy was as husky as his big brother. The famous phrase, "babies satisfactorily born," belongs to Churchill's later account of a note Stimson showed him. It was not the exact opening of Truman's first telegram. The real words were clinical. Their meaning was revolutionary. Until Trinity, the West's strongest answer to Soviet land power was air power, industrial depth, and an alliance already beginning to fracture. Now Truman possessed a weapon no other government could openly claim. The successful test strengthened Truman's confidence at Potsdam. It greatly diminished what he and his advisors saw as the need to bargain for Soviet help against Japan, and introduced a new kind of threat into American and Soviet calculations. Stimson later called the bomb a badly needed equalizer against the Red Army. But in July 1945, this was not yet a vast nuclear shield over Western Europe. The United States had only a tiny number of usable bombs, and those were committed to the war against Japan. There was no mature stockpile capable of erasing hundreds of Soviet divisions. The balance changed in a flash. It did not become simple. On 24 July, after a Potsdam session, Truman walked over to Stalin. No official verbatim record of their exchange has been found. In later accounts, Truman said he mentioned a new weapon of unusual destructive force. Stalin showed no special interest. He said he hoped the Americans would make good use of it against Japan. Churchill watched from a few meters away, expecting shock. Stalin asked no questions. That calm response does not prove ignorance. Soviet intelligence had penetrated the Manhattan Project. A top-secret report sent to Lavrenti Beria on 10 July described the coming test, plutonium, the initiator, and even the explosive lens around the core. Editors of the document say it is possible, but not proved, that Beria gave this exact report to Stalin before Potsdam. Truman was revealing a secret Stalin's intelligence service already possessed. Did Stalin feel fear? Almost certainly he understood the danger, but visible panic is not in the record. Marshal Georgy Zhukov later recalled Stalin telling Molotov that Igor Kurchatov's work must be accelerated. That is memoir evidence, not a transcript. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, on 20 August, the State Defense Committee created a special committee under Beria with sweeping authority over bomb production. Stalin's response was not documented retreat from Paris. It was a race to end America's monopoly. The weapon did not close the door on a Third World War. It changed the door, the lock, and the cost of opening it. No single invention saved Paris in the summer of 1945. The Soviet Union had won at a ruinous price. Its transport system and Western territories were devastated. Soldiers and civilians wanted survival, food, and home. On 23 June, more than 3 weeks before Trinity, the Supreme Soviet ordered the first demobilization of the Red Army's 13 oldest age cohorts. Forces were also shifting east for the war against Japan. Stalin had already gained an enormous security belt in Eastern Europe without attacking the Western allies. The West, meanwhile, lacked the political unity and ground strength for Operation Unthinkable. Churchill lost the British election before the Potsdam Conference ended. The military plan had shown that starting a war was easier to imagine than controlling one. Deterrence mattered. Exhaustion mattered. Logistics, politics, and existing spheres of occupation mattered too. So was Europe a hair's breadth from World War III? Not in the sense of two approved offensives racing toward each other. There is no solid evidence of a Soviet order to seize Paris, and Operation Unthinkable never became an Allied attack order. Saying the atomic bomb frightened Stalin into canceling an invasion turns uncertainty into a clean Hollywood ending. But the danger was real in another way. Enormous armies faced each other across a shattered continent. Trust collapsed faster than troops withdrew. Britain had already modeled a war beginning on 1 July. The United States had introduced a weapon that could destroy a city, while the Soviet Union began a crash program to build its own. The Second World War ended. The machinery of the Cold War was already moving. Operation Unthinkable remained secret for decades. Today its pages survive not as proof of a war that almost received its final command, but as a record of how frightened the victors had become. The document asked a military question and exposed a political truth. No side could force the future it wanted at an acceptable price. The Red Army could dominate the continent without easily conquering the world. The Western Allies could possess the atomic bomb without possessing enough bombs, troops, or certainty to dictate peace. Europe's fate was not secured by one telegram, one frightened dictator, or one miraculous weapon. Western leaders did not turn contingency into attack, while Stalin consolidated his gains rather than launch a documented westward offensive. The cost of another total war shaped every choice. For more moments where history almost went the other way.